Welcome. Today we are going to be interviewing one of our members here at Prince of Peace, Corrina. She is a Black woman in the Fox Cities, and we want to interview her about her experiences here. Pastor Roger McQuistion and will be asking questions, and myself, Pastor Jennifer Dene, will also be asking her questions. So let us begin. So, Corrina, tell us what life is like for you here in the Fox Cities as a Black woman.
Life is kind of as you would expect it to be for a 21-year-old woman. You know, for the most part, it's it's a great college town. We have Lawrence University, so there's a lot of different things to do. There's a lot of different people to meet. One thing that I have noticed living here, though, when I was born and for the first few years of my life, I lived in Washington Heights, which is an area of Milwaukee, and it's a very predominantly Black community. And so moving here, there was quite a culture change between being down there and having, multiple family houses and a lot of people that looked like me around me, right? And moving here was just as great. I loved it, but it was definitely a bit of a shock to see so many people that didn't look like me. And so being here, there's a lot of acceptance and there's a lot of love. But I feel like there's not a lot of, what's the best way to put it? It's a very predominantly white community. It's a very middle upper class community. And so there's just a difference in the way that people think and the way that people say things, and the way of life here is very different than from where I originally was born and grew up. But I love it here. My family's here, so. Yeah.
Corrina, thank you for agreeing to do this and sitting down and helping us understand. Have you found any particular barriers or challenges by being here in the Fox Valley in your life experience?
I think the biggest barrier that I've run into is simply ignorance when it comes to issues of with people of color. Like I said, this is so much of a predominantly white community, and so when we go out and we talk about systemic racism and we talk about the issues that people of color have, some people are just simply ignorant. It's not that they're choosing to not understand or, they're fighting against us. They simply don't know. And so having that sort of responsibility of educating people has become sort of a barrier in trying to have a normal life, being one thing that I talk to my friends a lot about is something that has to do with like the police brutality thing going on right now. And a lot of them just don't understand where that comes from. A lot of people don't understand where my fear as a woman of color comes from when I speak about officers. And so that barrier comes with just that education part. There just not a lot of people know about it because there's not much to know. A lot of people here have very similar. They're in a very similar state of life, and so they don't have to branch out and they don't have to think about all that other stuff. But that definitely gets in the way then with trying to relate to people and trying to have a conversation about something that I feel so strongly about, and my worries and my fears, I don't feel like they're always heard, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And do people ask you questions because you are a Black woman? Tell us about racism. What is that? Or do you just find that that's a barrier because people don't know what that's about?
I think a lot of people try to understand where we're coming from or where I'm coming from. But I think that there's also just, they don't know what to ask, you know? There's that barrier between, you know, what is an acceptable question? What question, you know, if I ask something, is it going to be embarrassing to you? Is it going to be triggering for you? You know, there's that line between what is an acceptable thing and what is not. And I think that a lot of people just don't even want to get near it. So they're just like, I'm here, I support you, but I'm going to support you from a distance, so that I don't insert myself into your problems.
And what do you think of that? Do you wish they would ask you or not?
I think that I would like people to ask me. I think rather than carrying on in ignorance, I would like you to ask me questions. You know, if there's something that is going on that you don't understand, please ask me, instead of, you know, posting something that may be damaging to our movement and what we want to accomplish through, whether it's the Black Lives Matter movement or simply education for people who don't know. So clarifying questions, if there's even a thought in your head that, ooh, maybe this isn't great, ask a person of color, because it's going to be so much better than just guessing and maybe being wrong or being more damaging than helpful.
Corrina, you've used a word that I think can be off-putting for people, and I know for a long time I've kind of had to work through that word, and I think it's an accurate word for what you're describing, and that's ignorant. And ignorant, I think, sometimes gets to be a red flag for some people, like, oh, they're calling me stupid or dumb or something. And that's not what that's meant, and not what you mean by that. Just,
not at all.
Just, you mean, well, why don't you define that?
Yeah. I use that word a lot because that's a word that my grandfather used to use all the time. He always used to say there's a difference between being ignorant and being stupid. Being stupid is knowing the answer and knowing how to get the answer and simply not doing it and expecting the same outcome more than once, right? But being ignorant is simply not knowing. You know, there's a huge difference between purposely ignoring facts and ignoring other people's experiences simply because you don't live them, and simply not knowing what they go through. And that's what ignorance is. And so being ignorant to the things around you isn't necessarily a bad thing. It just means you have a farther way to go in your education of learning what life is like.
Like an unawareness of just not having shared that experience.
Exactly.
So where do you find your support?
I have made a very tactical effort to sort of surround myself with the people that I love and trust. My family has been so helpful, and a lot of them are predominantly white, but they've really tried to listen and understand and just sort of support me. And it was the same thing coming to a place like Prince of Peace. The fact that you guys are able and willing to sit down and ask questions is so much more than so many other people do. So I thank you guys for this. But that's a lot of what I do, is I just try and surround myself with people who I know, if they don't know the answer, they won't choose to live in ignorance. They'll ask me, and they support me in every aspect of my life. So not just the hard times, but also the good times.
How have you found you witness to your faith in the midst of these challenges that you experience in your everyday life?
My faith, especially, you know, in this current time, has sort of been a savior for me. You know, through a lot of this, and I don't speak about it with many people, but through a lot of the work that I do with the Black Lives Matter movement and with justice work and stuff, there's a lot of hate that gets thrown at you. I've received, you know, a lot of death threats and a lot of threats to my family's safety, and people saying that I'm fighting a losing battle, and there's so much hate coming at me. And being able to go home and sit and just pray and cry and know that there is my God, who created me so perfectly in his image, is able to, and I'm able to just talk to him and ask him questions, and someone who is always there, you know. And so even at the end of the day, if I've had the worst day ever, being able to just come home and you know, read a Bible verse that I need to hear, or talk to you guys, or pray with my family, has been such a lifesaver through all of this.
What would you want others to know about your experiences?
The biggest thing that I hope other people would know is that they aren't just mine. You know, I'm speaking just because I can't speak for everyone in the people in the POC community, which is people of color, but there are so many people, even if they don't show it, even if they don't talk about it, there are so many people who experience the same things I do, that being nervous around police officers, that watching your back when you're in the mall or shopping, or having someone follow you through a store, or people sending you hate messages online. It's not just me, it's so many people in the person of color community. And so I guess my hope is that people know and people realize that, you know, someone of color may seem like just the happiest, and, you know, they might seem like the most secure person, but there could be so much going on in the background. So just, and I guess this is a question that I ask of you and any white ally that is out there, is simply to check in. Even just a simple hi or a simple smile can be so helpful and means so much to our community. And just, even if it's, you know, a simple show of support by liking a Facebook page, or you know, posting whatever, it shows us that we're not alone in this fight. And I think that that's something that I want people to know, is that you're not alone. There are so many people who love you and care about you. And from the POC perspective, there are so many white allies that I just want to let you know that we hear you, and we see you, and we care, and we love you, and thank you for all of your support.
Corrina, I wanted to ask a little bit about your experience. I can walk out this door and walk down College Avenue, and there wouldn't be anything said to me that would be challenging my race. But what would be your experience at times? And it's not universal, but do you have the same kind of laissez-faire attitude when you walk down the street, or is it, you kind of alluded to the fact that of going into a store or being out in public, and that you could be perceived and maybe treated differently or talked to differently? What is your experience and what goes through your mind when you walk College Avenue?
From growing up in a predominantly white family, I never really had to think about things like that, because I just sort of assumed that everything was fine because my family was sort of able to do the same thing, right? And then as I got older, you know, I'd walk into the mall, and I'd walk into a store, and I'd, you know, be with my friends, but, you know, I'd sort of turn around, and there would be one of the store associates just sort of trailing behind me wherever I go. Or if I'm walking down College Avenue during the day, I feel pretty safe and fine. But when I'm walking down, whether it's alone or with people at night, what goes through my mind is not as much, am I safe, but does everyone around me feel safe? Because if they don't, is that going to come back on me? Am I going to be blamed for them not feeling safe? You know, there's so much going on right now with, you know, with looking at Black people's past and saying, well, because of his past, he was a threat in this situation, and that's why he, deserved what he got or whatever. In my mind, I always want to make sure that no one has anything like that to say about me. If I'm walking behind someone, I will always keep more of a distance behind me just in case they feel like I'm a threat, even though I know that I'm not. That's just where people's mindsets are sometimes, is that I'm a threat because I look threatening. And so it's not necessarily about me feeling safe, but it's about making sure other people feel safe so that that doesn't come back and hurt me.
Is there anything else you wish others knew about your interactions or experiences, or how much energy maybe it takes to always be thinking of these things that perhaps the rest of us just take for granted?
It's exhausting. It's so tiring to always have to think. One thing that I was taught from a very young age, and especially when I started driving, there's a certain way that Black people think. There are certain things that you have to go through, especially when driving, but when you get pulled over. And so some of those points are like, when you get pulled over, if your ID or whatever you have to grab in order to show them is not right next to you and you can't grab it before they get out of their car, you're going to wait until they get to your window and it's rolled down already, right? As soon as you stop, you put the car in park and you put your hands on the dashboard, not the steering wheel, because if it's on the steering wheel, they might think you'll try and drive off. So you have to make sure your hands are on the steering wheel. You look them straight in the eye. You make sure that your hands are visible at all times. If you're going to grab something, you let them know which hand you're using and exactly where you're going to put it. You don't move your other hand until then. And so it's things like that. You always say, ma'am, sir. You can't show that you're angry, otherwise it might be misconstrued as aggressive. So there's a lot of that sort of stuff that goes on in a person of color's mind when you get pulled over that not a lot of people have to think about. You have to think, is what I'm saying going to be misconstrued as something that could be threatening? Or what can I do to make you feel safe, to make sure that I'm safe? And so thinking about all of that sort of stuff, it can be exhausting just to simply have to go through all of that stuff to make sure that I come home at the end of the day. There are times when sometimes I'll say goodbye. Something that I do a lot. Sorry, I'm stuttering. One thing that I've always done, and I started doing it a little more after all of this stuff sort of blew up with the George Floyd and then the Jacob Blake thing happened. Whenever I see people, I always make sure, as when I'm leaving them, to always say my last words to them. So whether that's, I love you, or take care, or, I really enjoyed seeing you. Always saying that last thing to them, because I don't know if I'll see them again. Especially when I go for a drive, or I'm going to a place where there might be a lot of people who could see my skin color as a threat. So that's something that I've always done, but I've sort of tried to do that a little more because of the current climate, is basically just saying my last words to everybody, because I just never know. You never know if you're going to come home at the end of the day and whether that last goodbye could really be your last goodbye. So that's something that sort of always goes through my head. Even if I'm texting you, I'll end with something that I want you to remember me by, in case something happens.
Corrina, you've been a member here at Prince of Peace for many years, mm-hmm. and a valued member of the congregation and the staff as well. is there a dream that you have for Prince of Peace?
I think my dream is that people could see and know that for the most part, this place is such a saving grace, and it's such a welcoming and loving place. And so, for people of color walking into a space like this, where Christianity has not always been the kindest to people of color, but B, this just being a predominantly white community, that can be so scary for a person of color or a person of the LGBTQ community to walk into, because you just don't know where people's minds are. So I guess my hope for people is that they know that this is a safe space, and then this is a space where you're free to just be who you are, and that people will love you for that. And I've definitely felt that. I've never felt singled out or any sort of hatred towards me. There's always just been love and this overwhelming amount of support here. So I think that's my dream for Prince of Peace, is that people realize that this is a safe space to come, and that eventually we can expand our POC attendance and our LGBTQ attendance, and just that people know that this is a safe space.
Any other closing thoughts that you'd like to share with us? Questions we didn't ask, or things we didn't get at that you would like to share with us?
No, I guess sort of a final thought is just thanking you guys for taking the time to do this. Like I said before, not a lot of people would. So thank you for giving me a platform to tell my story and the story of many other people. And just, thank you for doing this. I really do appreciate it.
And thank you for sharing with us and being vulnerable and being willing, because it'll go on our Facebook page, website, and you'll be out there. Yeah. So we really appreciate you opening up to us and sharing us and helping to educate us, because we don't know what it's like to be a person of color, to be a young Black woman in the Fox Cities, and we need to hear your stories, because that's part of our story, part of God's story, part of all of us together. And we certainly want to do whatever we can as Prince of Peace to support and love you. So we thank you.
Thank you, Corrina.